Labas rytas dar kartą. Good morning, everyone. The event will be held in English, and I want to say good morning to all of you. My name is Živilė Kropaitė. I'm a journalist with the Lithuanian Public Radio and Television, but it's not at all about me. I'm going to be talking to the best-selling author, someone whose book you might have read or will surely want to read after you've been with us for 45 minutes here. I hope that I will be pronouncing your name right. Katja Pantzar. Let's give you a big round of applause and welcome you to Vilnius. I suggest that we use a microphone.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Let's maybe begin with you telling us if this is your first time in Vilnius.
Yes, this is my very first time. I've been here just about 24 hours, and I love it. It reminds me a lot of Finland. We have many things in common, and I feel very at home here.
Even though Finland is not your only country where you've spent your life in. You were born in Canada, right?
I was actually born in Finland, but we left when I was 3, and I've lived in predominantly Canada, Vancouver and Toronto. I went to grad school in London, and as a child, I lived in New Zealand, in Christchurch and Auckland.
And you said that this was your first time in Vilnius, and you've noticed some similarities. Any examples of Sisu that you would have spotted in Vilnius? We will get to find out what Sisu actually is, but let's give them
Yes, definitely. Yes, super examples of Sisu. I've already noticed that almost everybody seems to have a good winter coat and good walking shoes, and they're out there walking, biking, doing all kinds of things. I was out yesterday and last night, and the weather was very Sisu-esque, meaning it was cold and rainy and dark, and the streets in the city center were full.
Do you notice yourself becoming a sort of ambassador of Sisu? I mean, probably one of the first things that people ask you when they meet you is what Sisu is actually all about, or is it not?
That's a really good question. I would say that an ambassador for Sisu, yes, but more I write about other people's stories about Sisu. I mean, I write about myself as well, but I think the ambassador role seems to be anything to do with Finnish culture or Finland and Sisu. So people want to go winter swimming or sauna, or they want advice about things Finnish, or they want to know more about the whole cultural context.
If you were to define in one sentence what Sisu actually was, what would you say?
I would say that Sisu is a fortitude, a strength, a courage in the face of challenges, big and small.
And your book, which we will get to read, is called GYVENK KAIP SUOMIS in Lithuanian, or I think the Finnish way in English, right? And it deals with Sisu, the secret of, what is the original title in English?
The original title in English, it first came out in the UK as Finding Sisu in search of, I believe, in search of courage, happiness, and health. I'm trying to remember actually the UK. Yeah, because the UK title was slightly different than the American title, The Finnish Way, Finding Courage and happiness through the power of Sisu, and that's the edition that has done best. So I always remember the American title. Yeah.
So but there are also there is not just one book, right? This is the first one, the first Sisu book. There's a second one, and there's a third one coming, right?
Yes, that's right. I've written other books as well, but in terms of the Sisu, the follow-up to this book, Everyday Sisu, came out with Penguin Random House in New York in 2022, and it's all about how to apply Sisu to your everyday life and in the face of challenges, which I think are just growing and growing, especially when we look at the news today and in the last weeks. And then I'm working on a third Sisu book, which is essentially a guide to Sisu through the stories of resilient women.
So how could Sisu help us deal with the challenges of today?
The challenges of today, without going into specifics,
We can if
we
you're
can.
willing. Yeah.
I think in order to, I could say something very political, but I maybe will keep it a little bit not so political and just say that no matter what we face, whatever challenges we have in our personal lives, with our health, our work, our relationships, our family, or the bigger picture, politics, world order, these kinds of things, the best way to protect our sisu, our resilience, is to take care of ourselves and others. So that means things like taking care of our physical and mental well-being in whatever way, that's different for everybody. Some people will jog 10 kilometers every day. Some people will walk for 15 minutes, and that's the thing that does it for them. Or, maybe they knit, or maybe they go to yoga, or whatever. Community, so having people who are supporting you and helping you, but also working together towards change and towards a better world, which that is a very general thing to say because we all have different ideas of what a better world is. But I would say if we're looking at the news, let's say the international news of the last week, rather than giving up and pulling the covers over our head and saying, I can't believe this is happening, Sisu means coming together, looking for solutions, looking for ways that we can affect change.
Wouldn't you say that, one of the options would be to just skip watching the news and, plunge into cold water?
I think yes, on one level, but I think, and I share a career, the same career as journalist. I can't not watch the news. I need to know what's going on. But what I do, for example, now is I just read the headlines and a little bit of the main information, and I don't go that much deeper because there are certain political players right now who you just cannot believe what's going on, and it's just upsetting. And then I try to go towards the solutions. So look at ways that we can support people who are not being supported, and try to find ways also to find joy. Go for a cold dip, hang out with friends, do things that build up our strength.
We can talk about politics more later if people are willing to, but let's get into the concept of Sisu in a bit of a deeper level. You single out different types of Sisu in your book, for example, kids Sisu, bike Sisu, nature Sisu and stuff. But before we delve into that, it's sort of interesting to know what you think, whether that's genetically transmitted or whether that's something that you can develop. What do you think? Knowing that you've sort of learned to dip into the water, I would say that it's maybe, something that you can develop, because water, not necessarily very comfortable conditions, I understand is one of the, conditions of Sisu. So what would you say? Is it genetical, or is it something that you develop with things you do?
I think it is. It's a bit of both. I mean, things are culturally specific. You do what people around you do, and if everybody eats potatoes or everybody eats fast food, those things have an effect on you. But I think these days very much think of Sisu as a mindset, like a kind of can-do attitude. So when things are not going well, instead of just lying down and pulling the covers over your head and saying, I can't do anything, it's let's look for solutions. Let's try to do things that will help. And I think that kind of mindset can be learned too. And the reason I use winter swimming, which I realize is not for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. You don't have to practice winter swimming, which is swimming in very cold water, about 1 degree Celsius. You don't have to do that to practice Sisu, but the idea being that you look at the resources and what's available and what you can do, and even little baby steps. For example, there is such a great body of evidence about physical well-being affecting mental well-being. So if going for a 15-minute walk is a big challenge every day. That's an example of Sisu, if you're able to get yourself to do that. So really, it's about getting over your own barriers and blocks, but also about knowing what works for you and having that mindset, the can-do solution mindset.
You say that swimming in really cold water is not for everyone, but for you, I understand, it changed your life completely. Would you tell us how?
Yeah, for me, cold water swimming was something that I discovered completely by accident, and really thought, as a journalist in Finland, I need to try this cultural thing that I've seen people doing. And at that point, winter swimming was not trending in Finland or around the world. And I really thought, I'll just try it, and that's that. And I went and tried it. This is 11 years ago, for the first time with a friend. And as I stood on the dock in my bathing suit, in weather like this, add some sleet, darkness, standing there in my bathing suit, I just thought, this is ridiculous. And I went into the water. I shot out in maybe less than a minute, and it hurt. It physically hurt. But then when I came out of the water, there was this sense of euphoria. Now I know it's called the swimmer's high, and it's because all the happy hormones, the endorphins, oxytocin, dopamine, all of these kick in. And in that moment, when I walked back we have a sauna, of course, as in Finland, we have more than 3 million of them. I realized something had changed. I just felt amazing. I felt really good. And then I started researching it, of course, and I realized at the same time that I've struggled with depression and anxiety for much of my life. I had this trick that I could do. I could go for a swim. If I could go every morning, I could kind of set my mindset for the day, which was not as depressed or as like, oh, I don't have the energy to do anything. It was like, hey, I can do it. Whatever worries, stresses, anxieties, tiredness I have, I'll leave it in the water and I'll move on. And I think for me, it made a really big difference. But also, it's a good example of, I think the weather here is very similar to that in Finland. And, instead of us sitting around during the winter months, which are long, 6 months at least, and waiting for cocktail weather on the beach, it's a great example of Sisu. Hey, we have this resource, cold water, and lots of it with our lakes and our sea. Let's use it, and actually use it for something that it's close to nature. It's very economical because it's free. You can do it whenever you want. And it's very, very time efficient. A dip of 30 seconds to a minute sets off all the happy hormones, and you get the endorphins. So there's all these great benefits from doing this activity, which does require some sisu.
I was actually surprised to learn that sisu substitutes a glass of, not sisu, but dipping in the cold water substitutes a glass of wine in terms of how you feel afterwards. Would you give us some more details?
I think actually probably several glasses of wine. I mean, the feeling, a lot of people who get hooked on winter swimming will say that it's the feeling that you have afterwards. The feeling of being invincible is like being on drugs or, having some kind of a high. And of course, the beauty is there's no hangover.
Yeah. And actually, I would say that in Vilnius, at least in the sort of a bubble, my bubble, I would say people are doing that. We have these groups and Facebook groups of people gathering to swim in the Vilnelle River and so on and so forth. I'm not sure how common that is in the rest of the country. But what I really liked to read in your book was how you actually single out that no one would judge you for how many minutes you spend in the cold water in Finland. It can just be, 2 seconds, it can be a minute. But as long as you're doing that, you're fine, right?
And I think that is key, and that's also this idea of Sisu as something that, there's also gentle Sisu. It doesn't have to be something like the historical examples, which are very hardcore and masculine and male and about war and Olympic victories. Everyday Sisu is, winter swimming is a good example for that. Some people are dippers. They go down the stairs, they hold on to the stairs, they're there for 20 seconds. Some people go into the water and they swim for several minutes. There is no wrong or right way, and it's about learning to listen to your own body and what works for you. Similarly, you don't have to be a certain age, a certain body type. You don't need to have fancy equipment. And that is this very Finnish idea of equality and everything being accessible to everybody. And that is also something that there are fewer and fewer places like that, I think, in the world where everybody is welcome. And you can't take your digital device with you. So you have this digital detox, which that too is very rare.
Well,
so,
there are digital devices that are transparent. I mean, they are resistant to water.
But we don't take, I would say 99% of people in Finland, when you go into the water or into the sauna, particularly into the water, unless of course they're taking selfies or something, but you don't take your phone with you. And you're in the moment, you're forced to be in the moment. The cold water forces you to be in the moment too.
And you say that if you get into cold water, you come out as a better human being. You claim that in the book. What about too much Sisu or the bad Sisu?
I think bad Sisu, this idea, there's a Finnish saying which roughly translates to kind of pushing through a gray rock. I think too much Sisu can lead to burnout and to a lot of negative things where you just push through and you don't listen to the sort of softer signals, or you just do things your way without taking into account other people and listening to their points of view and what's going on, sort of reading the room, as it were. So good Sisu, I think, is realizing if I take up winter swimming, I might be a 10-second dipper and not a 4-minute swimmer, and that's fine.
When you mentioned devices, I remembered that a good chunk of your book is dedicated to Finnish education, and there were some initiatives for parents to leave their screens as they are waiting for their kids, when they're playing football or doing anything else. Would you maybe tell us more about that? And would you also tell us why, in your view, that's still the same question because, as journalists, we can only ask one at once. So basically what I'm trying to ask is that how Sisu is the Finnish education system and what do you think of it?
I could give a concrete example. I have a 15-year-old son, and he is in what would be called, I think, upper secondary school, if we translate it into English. And they have this beautiful thing called kännykkäparkki, which basically means it's a parking place for your mobile phone. So when they come into the classroom, they park their phones, and then they go and they have their lessons. And I think that is something that's relatively recent, and it's in response to the fact that we in Finland, as in everywhere, I think, in the world, almost, have a problem with not only adults, but young people and children spending too much time on their screens.
We have this initiative in Lithuania as well. We are signing different petitions, but it still hasn't happened. I mean, unless we take separate schools. But you would say that it has proven to be the right initiative.
I think so, but I would at the same time say that there is a lot of discussion, and I have a 15-year-old son who I will admit spends way too much time online. But I also realize that part of it is the way he socializes, which is completely different. And one thing he's very interested in is languages. So he's playing online with kids from all around the world and practicing different languages. So there, I think, this is actually not a bad use of online time.
Would you still believe that the Finnish educational system is the best in the world, or have you shifted that view since that book was written?
That's a really good question. I think I think the Finnish education system is excellent. I think it's also teaching things that I grew up in North America. So teaching respect, teaching gentle sisu, you know, the idea that you don't always have to be the best. And this is my long way to answer your question, which is, I think it's a very good system, but I don't believe anymore in that something is the world's best. I think many things have their pros and their cons. I would definitely stand behind the Finnish education system, and I think it is excellent in many ways. And I can tell you all the things that I think are you know, positive about it. The independence from early on. My son from age 7 has gone to school by himself. Granted, we've lived close to his schools, but in North America, even if we lived close to the school, I would be expected to drive him, likely, okay, possibly walk, but in most instances drive, just because in so many places cars are necessary and the car culture is so built into the system.
Yeah.
So the independence he's learned from an early age, not even what he's learning in school, but the fact that the physical activity is incorporated, like he walks to school, they're expected to spend time outside every day, especially from an early age. Yeah.
When you mentioned that example, I remember this example from your book, where you told about your friend in North America who had a 6-year-old who would be spending basically all of his time inside, but going crazy because kids do have a lot of energy. And then you telling her, so why wouldn't you take him outside? And her saying, but you know, it's raining, we would get wet. And, you know, for us, this was something that we have been laughing at when you talk about Americans for a long time. So for us to have someone from within America, I could probably say that brings a lot of value to that book, you know, because it's not just us who see it in a funny way, but also you come up with your approach and also point out that, you know, it's kind of funny not to go outside when it's raining just because you would get wet. But the interesting thing is that the book was also translated into Finnish. So what would you say? What is the value for the Finns to learn about Sisu? And is that something they live with every day, this notion? Or is that something that, you know, just sort of half foreigners come and define it by?
I think that's an excellent question. I think if you took a poll of Finns, people living in Finland, and asked them about Sisu, I think it would divide them very much. I think particularly for older generations, it may even have a negative connotation, this idea that it's this very hard, almost masculine, you know, war, Olympic victory, that kind of thing. But in the modern, I would say, in recent years, for example, Elizabeth Lahti, who has, I believe it's the world's first PhD on Sisu, she has really brought it, along with others, Sisu more into the vein of positive psychology, of a mindset, but also something that can be gentle and soft. And, you know, this idea that baby steps, for example, doing something that for you is difficult, 5 minutes of walking or 5 minutes of cleaning or calling somebody that you've had an argument with and you want to resolve it somehow. And that idea that it is something to be proud of and something that can have many, many definitions, I think is changing. And I think the younger generation have adopted it in a way that it is not, it doesn't have the negative connotations in the same way. I think, or I actually know, I was very surprised that it was translated into Finnish. And then a lot of Finns have come up and said, oh, that was really interesting. I had no idea, you know, there was a lot of new information, but also I did not see those diverse points of view. And I think that's something too in Finland, that very recently, in the last 10 or 20 years, we've moved much more towards diversity and inclusion. That has been there from the beginning with the idea of equality and this idea that everybody has a possibility for free education and healthcare and these kinds of things. But it's only recently that I think in Finland we've started to listen to other voices, and I mean people who are not Finnish, and that they might have something to say that's relevant or interesting.
Do you also think that the fact that young people no longer associated with anything negative would maybe have to do with the trend of hygge in Denmark or Sweden, is it?
Hygge in Denmark, yeah.
And all sorts of other popular, trendy, fashionable philosophies, and maybe that sort of comes into Sisu comes into that trend too.
I think you're absolutely right. It's very much about those trends, but it's also about the fact that the Nordic lifestyle has interested the world for many, many years, because the Nordic countries have ranked so highly in the quality of life surveys that have been done internationally. And I was just incredibly lucky when this book first came out in English. It was the same year, or I think it was the next year, that Finland was named the world's happiest country, a title we've had for 7 years now. And that is based on, wellness rankings, on quality of life rankings, on things like trust, which is very, very important, social fairness, community, access to nature, all of the things that are part of Sisu or healthy Sisu. And that really made a big difference. I suspect the international interest in my work would not have been there had Finland and the other Nordic countries and the other lifestyle concepts not been so prominent and so newsworthy.
I was just checking because you mentioned the ranking, and I just had to mention that Lithuanians have also gotten into the happiest people ranking very recently. The condition being you have to be around 30. So, I mean, not the condition, but basically, I'm just trying to say that Lithuania's under 30 population has gotten the top spot for happiness. So we were very kind of surprised about that too, but also really happy. And what I'm trying to ask you is, in your book you also speak about that, about Finnish as the happiest people, and then you also say that if you get into a metro in Finland, you would find yourself around these gloomy, angry people, and you would be like, what are they talking about? How come we are the happiest nation? So what is your actual comment on that?
My comment on that is, I have come to understand that it is perhaps, I may be wrong here, but something that is shared with the Lithuanians, is we don't need to show our joy or our feelings on the outside. If I come and ask you for help, or, could you give me directions, and your face is like this, it's just because you're in your own space and you're giving me my own space. But then when I start talking to you, you may start smiling, and we'll have a conversation, realize we have things in common, or you'll ask me where I'm from, and then you'll tell me, oh, you've been there. So I think the happiness word is, I'm going to go out on a limb here and think that in Finland, or this is not the limb part, but the limb part is me making the assumption that here in Lithuania, the same thing is, we don't go around like, yeah, I'm so happy and this is so great. Yeah, but we may feel content and we may feel joy inside. But it is also a cultural thing that we don't make a big deal out of it. We don't brag. We don't go around telling people what great things have happened to us. And I think from a North American perspective, where everything needs to be very exaggerated and very, like if I'm happy, I need to show it. It can be easy to misread a kind of quiet reserve or distance. I think the other thing is knowing everything that's going on. People have a lot to carry in their minds, and that also has an impact. So if you're not as aware of what's going on, I'm speaking of world events right now, for example, then it's easy to maybe be more blissful in an obvious way.
Yeah, well, my explanation for us not being so obviously shiny and radiant and happy has been that we, we have been behind the Iron Curtain for over 50 years, and we have sort of learned to be suspicious about things, and we don't just have to always be so open because we don't know what people are actually thinking. But we are moving from that because we have been independent for 35 years. But that sort of reservance and us being a little shy or I don't know, looking angry sometimes, that is still there. I remember once I was moderating this event, and there was this guy in row 1 sitting completely, absolutely angry all the time. And then he approached me and said, "Very well done." And I was like, do you get that in Finland?
I completely get that, and I completely understand that. And I think, it's the weight of history is also something. If you're not aware of your history or the history of others, it can be easy to not understand that. But I think also that kind of, I think we're more aware too of that there's all kinds of people, and not everybody is comfortable in a social setting or in a way that they're going to be outwardly expressing joy or happiness. But that doesn't mean that it's not reflective of how they feel necessarily.
Let's talk a little bit about bike Sisu as well. You devote a lot of attention in your book to that. I was extremely happy to learn that in Finland, in Helsinki, I think there was an app, at least for a certain period of time, with an option to see how many bars of chocolate you could have if you had been taking not the tram that you're now taking, but a bike, for example. That is very, that sounds like a very, very attractive means of alluring people to bikes. What is your story with bikes? How did you discover them as, your only main means of transport while in Finland?
I had biked before in other places that I've lived, but I think the challenge was often, no bike lanes, not safe, those kinds of issues and this has changed, but for example, in the cities where I lived in my youth, Vancouver, Toronto, London, and still to this day in London, I'm pretty cautious about cycling. I'll go through Hyde Park, but not going to do it through 5 lanes of traffic where the bike lane is in the middle of the lanes of traffic. But when I moved to Helsinki, to Finland, which was many, many years ago now, to my joy, discovered that there were not only bike lanes just about everywhere that you could go, but that they have their own traffic lights and everything. So there's very little danger involved because you don't have to try to guess where you can go and worry about cars and stuff. And I essentially started biking just about everywhere. And then I quickly learned, watched at the time I was working for a large media company, Sanoma, watched my colleagues. Oh, okay. They wear ski goggles in the winter. So when there's sleet, another good example of Sisu, they put on, studded tires. They have the right rain gear or winter gear, depending on the weather. And they arrive at work refreshed and ready to go and, talking like little children about what they saw on the way. There was a bird or this happened when they were biking through the woods, and realized, oh, okay, this is totally possible. I just need to have the right approach, the right mindset, and also the right gear. And then as time went on, I, of course, realized too when I thought about it more, that the environmental, it's a climate-friendly way to move. You get a free workout. You never have to look for parking. You never get parking tickets. The maintenance is fairly inexpensive. I haven't owned a car in more than 2 decades, but people tell me that it's very, the parking permits you need, the maintenance, all of those things. And someone I know recently bought a car, and then they were telling me how much it cost. And I was like, you paid that much for a car? Okay, of course. But yeah. So I find it's just a better use of time and energy. What I put out into the world is better than if I had a car. And I think I'm just incredibly lucky that the city I live in Helsinki, it's much faster to bike almost in the city center than go any other way. Like, you'd be really hard pressed to get there faster by car or even public transit, which is great. So
Before we open this up to public, let me ask you sort of a finalizing question. We have talked that the Danish have hygge, the Finnish have Sisu. I'm not sure about Lithuanians. I think we haven't invented a unifying philosophy to define our lifestyle yet. Maybe someone's got an idea, and I'm gonna ask them to raise their hands. But the Swedish have got lagom, I think. Why do you think societies need to kind of put things into shelves, put their lifestyles into shelves?
that's an excellent question. I think why... This is tricky to answer because Sisu, of course, the original concept dates back like 500-600 years ago. It was in the first Finnish language dictionary. And it's a concept, I think, a cultural concept that kind of defines a Finnish approach to things, to life, to challenges, to everyday. So I think it encapsulates something that is very much in the spirit. And this may not be a direct answer to your question, but you may know that Finland has a very competitive relationship with Sweden for a variety of reasons. And I always find that the most informative and the most revealing comments come from outside. So when several Swedish reporters, journalists have come and told me, you know, we just don't have Sisu in Sweden. Swedes are just not, yeah. And it's like, yeah, it is this defining thing where it's that extra grit or resilience. It's raining, okay, I'll put on a raincoat. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but in its essence, it really is that notion of resilience. And if we should refer to politics, can we?
Of course,
Yeah.
we should.
Okay.
These days we just cannot avoid
Looking at I'm not going to name, I don't even want to name, let's just say recent world events in the last week, looking at how presidents and leaders of countries in Europe have come together to try to find a solution and to make sure that the bully or the bullying does not happen, or that we try to come up against it. It's been interesting to see how the Finnish president and other leaders in Europe, and of course the UK is part of Europe, even though they're not part any longer of the EU, have stepped up and shown Sisu and said, this is not acceptable. We need to look at other ways to support. And I think that that's something that is very, very Sisu and very Finnish. We can't just sit back and let things happen, even to other people. We do care about homelessness. We do care about all kinds of things that affect the whole society and not just us. And I often say Sisu is, in the end, it's more about we than me. How do my actions affect other people? So the fact that I swim in the sea every day, I also have an obligation to keep the sea clean and do things with my actions, what I purchase, what I eat, what I throw into the garbage, that keep the water clean so that my son can swim in the Baltic Sea when he's my age.
Well, when I actually read the title of your book in Lithuanian, which means like something like live like a Finn, the first thing that came to my mind was defense, actually. I was thinking, you know, there is a threat of Russia, the Finnish just go and join NATO, and that's a very, very good example of Sisu in a broader sense. Let's go and see if there is anyone in the audience who would have a question. I see one hand. Would there be more people who would want to do that? Okay, maybe they will find the opportunity later. But do we have a microphone, or do I share my microphone? Could you please bring the microphone to the gentleman in row 2? Would you raise your hand again? Thank you.
Sveiki, aš Kazimieras. Norėčiau užduoti tokį klausimą. Autorė ir vedėja labai gražiai perėjo beveik prie to, ką aš norėjau užduoti iš pat pradžių. Šią knygą aš perskaičiau 2 kartus.
He's read
Ir
the book twice.
baigdamas skaityti ją, pradėjau iš naujo skaityti įvadą. Ir taip užbaigiau ją labai gražiai 2 kartus. Ir mano klausimas būtų toksai apie Sisu. Suomijai prieš tampant NATO mes žinome, kad Suomijų politikai tikrai labai daug išgėrė alkoholio su pačiais rusais ir beveik juos tempė į lovą ir miegojo kartu su jais. Ir mes sužinojom tokį įdomų dalyką, kuris suomiškai tariant buvo labai švelniai ir labai gražiai apeitas, niekam nesakant ir niekam neparodant. Išaiškiai įdomus dalykas, kad Suomija šiandien yra ginkluota iki pat ausų. Iš visų NATO narių, tame ir tarpe, kurie esam, plikais pasturgaliais, Suomija šiandien yra pati galingiausia. Sakykit, ar tai gali būti ir vadintumėm visos Suomijų tautos Sisu? Politinė prasme. Ačiū.
Okay, very briefly, I'm just going to say 2 things. The gentleman has read the book twice, from the beginning to the end. And now the question is to do with defense. Basically, if the fact that Finland is one of the most well-armed countries in Europe, whether that's Sisu in your perspective.
Yes. Sisu is also being aware of what's going on and what's on the horizon, and the history that we have has been very informative, and we have not forgotten.
We see there's another question. Would we please give the microphone to the gentleman?
Yeah, I would like to ask you, how do you deal with people that they don't believe in Sisu? Do you get angry with them, or what is your approach to them?
I'm so old. I try not to get angry with people anymore because I find that it's not a good use of my energy. So I will have a discussion and I would try to be calm and talk about them, but I think everybody can believe in what they want to, and that's completely fine if they don't believe in it. And I don't see it really as a philosophy that you need to believe in or not believe in. I think it's a cultural concept, and I don't really I try to not get angry with people, and I just move my energy to something more productive.
Thank you. Anyone else? Maybe someone's got an idea of what the Lithuanian equivalent of Sisu would be. That's very welcome too, if you've got any. Who is the best example of Sisu people-wise in Finland?
That is a really good question. I have lists of hundreds and hundreds of people, partly because I am researching this next book. The working title is Finland by Sisu, Stories Through a Cultural Guide Through the Stories of Resilient Women, really focusing on women, because men have gotten a lot of Sisu in the history books, not so much women. I would say I'm going to try to pick a few people who you might know, because if I pick obscure people, then it's not as effective. I would say I'll give a few examples. One, Sanna Marin, our former prime minister, who was the youngest prime minister for a very long time, who led an all-female, for a little bit, coalition.
But she stepped down at some point.
She did step down, but...
Is that still Sisu?
It is, but it was her term was up, and she realized, I think she dealt with a lot of criticism that came about, partly because she was an attractive young woman. Yes, some people also had problems with her politics, but I think she did not... Internationally, she's received a lot of credit, but in Finland, credit for pulling a government through war, the crisis, the pandemic, That is something that was not acknowledged. I think Tove Jansson, the author of the Moomins, I think Armi Ratia, the founder of Marimekko, the hundreds of women who have given Finland all kinds of rights for women, and made sure not just women, but that other people are taken care of. A lot of the social welfare system, there have been a lot of great men, but a lot of women who have ensured that everybody has the opportunity for education, for healthcare, for other things.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would have one last comment or question before we need to go? Yes, please.
I was going to try to resist speaking because it's kind of a joke. Katja and I crossed paths in Toronto 25 years ago, so hello.
Hi, I saw you. I was like, wow.
Wow, yes, all these decades ago. Okay, so it's kind of a joke, so forgive me for this. I don't know a Lithuanian word for Sisu, but I know the word that defines a lot of Lithuanian life that needs to be removed. And that word is, what is life? Vargas. So translate that.
I need a translation.
Vargas means basically, how shall I translate it?
Burden.
Yeah, probably a burden. People carry their cross on their shoulders, and a lot of times when you meet a Lithuanian, you would say like, "How are you doing?" Well, nu kažkaip judam krutam. It's like we're, step by step somehow moving towards some kind of a goal. So we do have a little bit of that. In our defense, I would say that is changing. Do you not think so? Okay, what about Canada? Is there a Canadian Sisu?
Well, before we go to Canada, I would say that I think exactly, was it Vargas?
Oh, no, you don't have to be learning that.
No, but I was going to say, I think a lot of Finns could also relate to that. This idea of how are you? Okay, I can. This is a Canadian anecdote that relates to Finland. So my mother has lived in Canada for over 40 years, and she still retains a very Finnishness in her. So she goes to the local Safeway after Christmas to do the grocery shopping, and the cashier is like, "Hi, how are you?" Which in North America doesn't mean anything, and the only response is, "Great, how are you?"
Yeah.
And my mother says, "Oh, we ran out of food over Christmas." And she starts going on. We ran out of food, and then the weather was it. And the cashier just looks at her like, "Where are you from?" And she's got a Canadian credit card. She's got a, customer loyalty. That is Vargas.
I think on that funny note, it's sort of really sad to finish the Finnish conversation. Okay, let's take another one since no one is throwing us out yet.
Jeigu netikėtai Lukašenka su Putino pagalba užpultų Lietuvą, ar suomių moteris ateitų?
I know we're going somewhere because I heard Putin.
Yeah, finally we're giving some actual names of actual villains. So the question is, if you think that Lukashenko and Putin basically came to Lithuania, would the Finns come and save us? Would the Finnish women come and save us?
That is a question that is very hard to answer because it would so much depend on what the situation was, like what else was happening, but I think the main mandate of the EU is to help one another.
And
to support one another.
And I would just add a possibly irrelevant comment. I think who would really come and help us first would actually be Ukrainians. But that's just an opinion that can not necessarily be shared. But we are now really moving to a point where we just have to stop. But we are extremely grateful, extremely excited that you have spent a good hour talking to us. I know that you would probably be spending some time by the Balto stand where people can get books and get signatures and continue conversations, right? So this is just for an opportunity for me to remind you to go to wherever. I cannot remember where the stand really is, but it's in this 5 hole. You don't have to be going outside. It's just a few stairs down and then find the Balto stand, and Katja will be there. And at this point, we're going to give you a very, very big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was absolutely a huge pleasure and honor to be here.